Colleagues and dear participants, I will kindly ask you to take your seats. We are about to start. Okay, dear colleagues, participants, excellencies, all friends and civil society representatives, welcome to this fourth plenary session, of which the topic is rule of law and prevention and eradication of torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. We'll have an exchange of views on the question of abolition of capital punishment and on protection of human rights when combating terrorism. My name is Ellen Svensson and I'm the Norwegian ambassador to the OSCE. And before I introduce you to our excellent panel today, I will have short three key points to make by way of introduction. First, despite the absolute prohibition of torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment under international law, such practices remain widespread throughout the OSCE region. Impunity is a key factor enabling their continued use. Eradicating torture and other forms of ill treatment requires prompt, thorough, impartial and effective investigations by independent national authorities. Victims must have access to effective remedies without fear of intimidation or reprisals. Second, global recognition that the death penalty constitutes the ultimate cruel, inhuman and degrading punishment has continued to grow since its ban by the European Convention on Human Rights. Its application affects core OSCE human dimension commitments, particularly the right to life and the prohibition of torture. Participating states have committed to reviewing the question of abolition and pledged to share information and raise public awareness. Third and last point, the OSCE's comprehensive concept of security requires in numerous commitments that counter-terrorism measures uphold human rights and the rule of law. In practice, however, many rights protections are increasingly sidelined in the name of national security. Misuse of counter-terrorism laws to suppress dissent, protests or civil society actors, including journalists, bloggers and human rights defenders, undermines trust, civic space and legitimacy. This session will review participating states' efforts to enhance accountability for torture and ill treatment and reaffirm the centrality of human rights in counter-terrorism and VERLT prevention at both national and multinational level. Colleagues, it is now a pleasure to invite the first speaker on our panel today. He is joining us, I hope, online from Sydney, quite late already. This is Professor Ben Saul, known to many of you, UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. Professor Saul has taught at a number of distinguished universities and has published extensively. I won't go through the whole list, but rather give the floor to you, Professor Saul.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm pleased to join you from Sydney and I thank the organisers for the invitation to speak today. In my report to the General Assembly on regional organisations last year, I acknowledged the very positive contributions of the OSCE in promoting human rights while countering terrorism, including through the guidance and technical assistance of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. I urge OSCE members to redouble their efforts to promote and protect human rights while countering terrorism at home and abroad. As Special Rapporteur, I receive and address hundreds of complaints every year from victims of human rights violations on every continent. Today, too many governments worldwide continue to violate human rights and compromise the rule of law. Abuses take many forms, starting with extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention, torture, and unfair trial. Counterterrorism laws and states of emergency are often weaponized against political opponents, civil society, journalists, human rights defenders, environmental activists, minorities, students, teachers, and even lawyers and judges. Sweeping definitions of terrorism and violent extremism infringe the principle of legality and certainty, are prone to abuse, and lead to violations of many fundamental rights. The lack of an adequate international definition of terrorism remains a major source of rights violations, as well as impeding effective counterterrorism cooperation and justice for victims. Vague and overbroad preparatory terrorism offences unjustifiably criminalise acts with no genuine causal connection to the commission of actual terrorist violence, including punishing legitimate freedom of expression and even giving life-saving humanitarian relief. Disproportionate punishments are often meted out by judiciaries lacking in independence. Organisations and individuals are abusively listed as terrorist without due process or judicial safeguards, including in recent years movements devoted to human rights, anti-war protest, indigenous rights, prisoners' rights, and sexual orientation and gender identity. Counterterrorism sanctions and financing laws have undermined legitimate non-profit organisations and civic space, as well as freedoms of association, assembly, and expression, the right to political participation, and humanitarian assistance. Administrative measures, the subject of my recent report, outside the criminal justice process are often used when they are not necessary or proportionate and without due process or effective judicial safeguards. New technologies are making old methods of harassing civil society cheaper and easier, hollowing out the right to privacy without adequate regulatory controls. Examples include spyware, facial recognition software, border management systems, artificial intelligence and military targeting, and online content moderation by private companies. The recent UN Pact for the Future warned of the abuse of new technologies by terrorists, but regrettably said nothing at all about the systematic misuse of technology by states while countering terrorism. Transnational repression is a growing trend against those falsely accused of terrorism, from journalists to minorities, and including physical threats and attacks, abusive terrorist listings, unfounded extradition requests, forced return of refugees, and misuse of new technologies. Wars on terror with catastrophic humanitarian consequences have been enabled by states with influence who fail to use it to ensure respect for international law by others. A dangerous new front has opened in recent months with the so-called war on narco-terrorists in the Americas. Selectivity and double standards in enforcing international law erode public confidence in the credibility and legitimacy of international law and encourage a turn from law to violence and raw power to settle disputes. There's an urgent need for stronger independent oversight and accountability mechanisms in counterterrorism and more effective remedies to ensure respect for human rights by law enforcement authorities. There's also a need for states, regional organisations, and the United Nations to more meaningfully engage with diverse civil society organisations who can be invaluable independent watchdogs that monitor violations and assist victims to obtain remedies. Their experience and expertise enhances the legitimacy of counterterrorism, builds public confidence and security cooperation, and makes efforts ultimately more effective. Crucially, many states have also failed to seriously acknowledge, let alone address, the conditions conducive to terrorism, including state violations of human rights, political exclusion, and economic marginalisation, while impunity for such violations is often endemic. Protecting human rights in countering terrorism is essential not only to safeguard human dignity, it also ultimately enhances security. It forces law enforcement to be disciplined by acting only where necessary and proportionate, thus also preserving scarce resources. It ensures the integrity of criminal trials and so serves justice for victims. It encourages communities to cooperate with the authorities. It prevents rights violations from becoming grievances which fuel more terrorism, and it increases the confidence of other states to cooperate. Now, these are tough times for protecting human rights globally, including while countering terrorism. Due to the scorched earth tactics of some states, relentless attacks on international norms and institutions, the drastic underfunding of the humanitarian development and peacemaking activities that prevent terrorism, and a liquidity crisis in the UN and further afield impeding human rights protection. I'm nonetheless optimistic. I'm inspired by the many champions of human rights working tirelessly worldwide, including within even authoritarian governments. In my recent official visits to Somalia and West Africa, I encountered many good practices being implemented by governments genuinely facing existential terrorist threats with extremely limited resources. In closing, I urge all states to take concrete, effective measures to restore respect for human rights, to fight against impunity, and to deliver hope and justice for victims. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those powerful words, Professor Saul. You did indeed outline the extent to which we are living in tough times when it comes to the implementation of and respect of human rights across the board and across the globe. And particularly, I noticed what you said about the importance of this not being essential not just to ensure human dignity, but a question of security, which ties also very closely in, I think, with the comprehensive concept of security of the OSCE. Thank you also for pointing to good practices and for leaving us with on a hopeful note. I know it's late in Sydney, so Professor Saul will leave us very soon, but I would like to thank you so much for your intervention and then pass the floor on to our second panelist today, Dr. Slavica Dimitrievska. You are State Councillor for the National Preventive Mechanism at the North Macedonia Ombudsman Office, and you're a member of the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture, and a lot more, but I'll leave it to that and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Dear Your Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues. It is an honor to address you today as a member of the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment in respect of North Macedonia, but also as a head of the Macedonian National Preventive Mechanism. The theme before us touches the core of our shared values and international obligations. Terrorism is a real and serious threat to the security of our societies. Yet, precisely in moments of crisis, our commitment to the rule of law and to human dignity must remain firm. The European international jurisprudence is clear. Security and human rights are not mutually exclusive. They are mutually reinforcing. And the prohibition of torture and ill treatment is absolute. It allows for no exceptions, not in war, not in state of emergency, and not in face of terrorism. The European Convention on Human Rights has rightly defined that no one shall be subjected to torture or to inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, and everyone's right to life shall be protected by law. Yet, despite strong legal frameworks, the practical implementation of this principle remains deeply challenging, in particular when deprivation of liberty is in question. As a matter of fact, persons deprived of liberty are among the most vulnerable members of society, often isolated, voiceless, and entirely dependent on the authorities responsible for their care. Due to this inherent vulnerability, their human rights and dignity must be fully respected and protected at all times. The international standards, including the United Nations standards minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, the Nelson Mandela rules, make clear that deprivation of liberty must never equate to deprivation of humanity. All individuals in detention, regardless of the reasons for their incarceration, have the right to be treated with dignity, free from torture, ill treatment, or discrimination. Safeguarding these rights is a fundamental obligation of every state and a true test of its commitment to justice and the rule of law. Hence, through its visits, the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture exposed some of the critical issues. Let me highlight several of them. Across multiple countries, the CPT continues to receive consistent and credible allegations of ill treatment, including beatings, threats, and excessive use of force by police, particularly during arrests and interrogations. This is not just a problem of individual misconduct. It reflects systematic failings, a lack of proper training, a culture of impunity, and weak oversight mechanisms. What aggravates this problem is the failure to properly investigate such allegations. Investigations are too often delayed, superficial, or ineffective. This sends a dangerous message that the system tolerates abuse. Overcrowding remains a chronic issue in many prisons. Cramped, unsanitary, and unsafe conditions with limited access to outdoor exercise, meaningful activities, or adequate health care. The overcrowding in such environments, tension and violence flourish. The overcrowding and the inadequate detention conditions can present additional risk factor for intensifying the risk of radicalization. There are cases when access to a lawyer is denied on the grounds that the lawyer allegedly may be used as a means of transmitting instructions linked to terrorist or other criminal activity. Excessive use of solitary confinement or isolation regimes, sometimes imposed for weeks or months, without proper medical or psychological oversight. The use of solitary confinement should be absolutely prohibited for death row and life sentence prisoners by virtue of their sentence, for mentally ill prisoners, and for children under the age of 18. One of the most troubling patterns the CPT has observed is the treatment of vulnerable groups in detention, women and girls among. They face greater risk of gender-based violence, sexual abuse, neglect of reproductive health needs, and discrimination. Many of them have histories of trauma, poverty, or exploitation prior to their incarceration, which are often compounded by conditions in detention. International standards, such as the United Nations rules for the treatment of women prisoners and non-custodial measures for women offenders, the Bangkok rules, emphasize that the specific needs and rights of women and girls must be recognized and protected. Their dignity must be upheld, and their access to gender-sensitive healthcare, legal support, and rehabilitation programs must be guaranteed. Respecting the rights of women and girls in detention is not only a legal requirement, it's a matter of humanity and justice. In some OSCE participating states where violent extremist prisoners may also be held, the state failed to provide them with tailored, purposeful, and varied programs of activities that would aid them on their path to reintegration. We must stress here that a proper, tailor-made resocialization program is a key element to de-radicalization because it can provide practical tools for reintegration after release, job training, education. It can rebuild the broken trust with institutions, police, schools, government. It can replace the extremist group identity with pro-social identities and can create future prospects that make a return to violence less appalling. Such scope of activities should also continue outside the prison environment as a prevention for return to the old habits. Prevention requires concrete actions, which means training for law enforcement and security personnel, ensuring they understand both their duty to protect the public and their duty to respect the dignity of all individuals. Well-trained staff could contribute to better relationships between them and the prisoners and would reduce tensions inherent in any prison environment. Developing interrogation techniques rooted in psychology, not coercion, which yield reliable information without recourse to ill treatment. Maintaining transparency, all undertaken activities must be conducted within the framework of law, subject to public trust and democratic oversight. The preventive mandate of CPT allows to see where the risks are greatest, which is why we have consistently underlined several safeguards that are indispensable when states act. Prompt access to a lawyer, a doctor, and family members, without delay and without discrimination. Effective judicial oversight of all places of deprivation of liberty. Accurate record-keeping of every stage of detention, ensuring accountability. Independent monitoring, including bodies such as the CPT or National Preventive Mechanism established under the OPCAT. When these safeguards are weakened, under the pretext of national security, the space for ill treatment grows. Conversely, where they are respected, states both protect human rights and strengthen their capacity to respond lawfully to terrorism. Prevention is about building resilient systems where ill treatment cannot take roots, where every actor knows in the line that must never be crossed. Ladies and gentlemen, torture prevention is not just about stopping physical abuse. It is about transforming systems that dehumanize, marginalize, and neglect. It is about building institutions where dignity is the norm, not the exception. Let us be clear. Torture prevention is not optional. It is a legal obligation, a moral imperative, and a measure of our collective humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dimitrievska, for these powerful words. I wanted to pick up on what you said in closing on the importance of transforming that torture prevention is not just about each and all individuals, but it's about transforming institutions and whole systems. And I think that's a very important reminder that you left us with there. I want to turn now to our last speaker on the panel before we open for comments from you, and that is Dr. Oleg Gushtin. You're a legal counselor of the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War in Ukraine. And Dr. Gushtin, you are a lawyer with military, peacekeeping, and academia and international relations experience. So with that panoply of experience, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here. Well, I wish I could say that it's not just an honor, but it's a pleasure to be here, but I can't and still can't. It's just because millions of Ukrainians still suffering from consequences of ongoing situation of clashes between Russians and Ukrainians in an armed conflict as well until. So my intervention will be about the importance of the rule of law for Ukrainians. When I'm just asked myself why I was chosen by my authority to be here and to make introductory remarks. And maybe I find the answer every day we have meetings with relations with loved ones and members of family of those who are still in Russian captivity, of those who suffered from torture, ill treatment in Russia's place of detention. And one of the most frequently asked questions from relatives is, despite all cases of Russian torture of Ukrainians, why don't Ukrainians do the same? Why don't Ukrainians torture Russians in response? And the probable answer is because Russians want the same from us, so that they prove to the whole world that we are just like them. But the reality is, despite all the circumstances, despite the millions of cases of tortures, we are not the same. And the principle of rule of law for Ukrainians is not just an abstract words. It's a reality that we want to achieve during the ongoing conflict. When the principle of rule of law is recognized and applied in Ukraine, and the human dignity is recognized as a source of rights and freedom. We know that one of the fundamental elements of the rule of law are the prohibition of all kind of arbitrariness, respect for human rights, and access to independent justice. In this context, when Russia is withdrawn from European Convention of Prevention of Torture, Ukraine recognizes and adheres to the principle of their absolute prohibition. Even despite the introduction of martial law, Ukraine applies the rights of derogation from its human rights obligation only to the minimum extent necessary. Established according to the Third Geneva Convention, permanent and temporary place of detention for prisoners of war are operating absolutely successful. And we provided and still providing a full access of the whole independent human rights monitoring mechanisms to these places. And I currently encourage all of you to visit Ukraine and absolutely freely, visit all the places of detention, to be sure that the principle of rule of law describing a prohibition of torture is applied by Ukrainian side in 100%. All components of the national preventive mechanisms are still functioning without any kind of delay. But at the same time, Russian side use at least 18 methods of torture as defined in the UN Istanbul Protocol. I have never faced the Istanbul Protocol before the war, but it was my obligation to explain that all the possible kind of torture that just possible in the earth is provided to Ukrainians and against Ukrainians during the captivity. Currently, law enforcement officials involved in the criminal prosecution and torture of our citizens feel almost immune from the punishment. That is why it's important for the ICC to issue new warrants for those who are perpetrating Ukraine is committing to respond to identify violation, and more than 1,700,000 criminal proceedings have been registered in Ukraine, more than half of which involve torture and other cruel treatment. Over the past 3 years, Ukrainian courts have delivered more than 100 war crimes judgments, covering the wide range of crimes, including murder, cruel treatment, sexual and gender-based violence, pillage and attacks of civilians. We are sure that Ukrainian ratification of the Rome Statute will improve the application of international law at the national level and the quality of legal reasoning of war crime cases. One of the fundamental features of the rule of law is compensation for damages caused by numerous cases related to aggression. Therefore, we welcome the active work of the Registry of Damages for Ukraine, which provide over the 40 categories of claims. We hope that mechanisms for compensation for damages can start working within a year. And I can see in this room a representative of Ukrainian Human Rights Society and human rights defenders. And I currently encourage all of you to join this meeting, to join this conversation, and describe certain types of torture and other cruel treatment of Ukrainians by the aggressor. And in the same time, I encourage you to explain that the Ukrainian will never withdraw from its obligation according to rule of law. And that is why the rule of law for Ukrainians, as I said previously, is not just an abstract words. It's not even the main goal of accessing of EU membership. It's our mentality. It's a matter of Ukrainian type of living, not to response for a torture by a torture, not to response for a killing by a killing. Therefore, I thank you, Chairman, for your attention. And again, I currently encourage all of Ukrainians to give their words to this further conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this encouragement, for reminding us of the accountability, for reminding us of the gruesome violations of international humanitarian law and human rights against Ukrainian prisoners, and for calling out to everyone not to respond by the same means. We now open the floor for remarks and comments, and before I do that, I will just remind you, I mean, it should be clear by now, this is the fourth session, but I would nevertheless remind you of a couple of conduct for the interventions on the floor. I will ask you to follow the following rules. When you're giving the floor, please introduce yourself, give your name and the organisation you represent, and you may only take the floor on behalf of the organisation under which you have registered to attend this conference. Please keep your contribution brief and on topic, and I remind you that the speaking time is 3 minutes. We have a full list of speakers, so I will cut everyone, and I mean everyone, at 3 minutes. That is not just to keep it equal for everyone. You may also submit written documents online via the conference platform if you do not finish your interventions, and do also recall that all interventions should be conducted in a respectful tone. We will also make sure that we leave some time to come back to our prominent panelists towards the end of this session. So with that, I open the floor for the first speaker, which is Ukraine. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. The latest OSCE Moscow Mechanism report on the treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war sets out facts that should alarm every state committed to the rule of law. Since February 2022, at least 13,500 Ukrainian service members has been detained by Russia, approximately 169 dead in captivity, nearly 6,800 repatriated, and 6,300 remain imprisoned. The mission found widespread and systematic torture and ill treatment across the detention cycle. It also recorded Russia's refusal to cooperate with mission. This is the other independent report detailing methods of abuse that have no place in the 21st century. Beating, electric shock, forced stress position, dog attacks, sexual violence, mock execution, and death threat. It documented execution of prisoners of war, including after surrender. The independent expert recorded the systematic denial of prisoners of war status, the staging the shame trail, and the misuse of counter-terrorism label to prosecute Ukrainian soldiers merely for defending their country. Such acts violate international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and they weaponize counter-terrorism as a pretext of dismantle protection owned by prisoners of war and civilian alike. Our recommendations are concrete. Russia must immediately recognize all eligible Ukrainian detainees as prisoners of war, end torture and execution, ensure human condition, and grant the ICRC full access to the places of detention and urge by mission. We call on participating states for coordinate use of domestic prosecution, universal jurisdiction, and ICC proceeding against those responsible for torture, unlawful killing, and persecution, commanders and policymakers included. Repatriation must follow compensation, rehabilitation, and guarantees of non-repetition for victims and their families. Participating states should reinforce prevention by adequately resourcing national preventing mechanism, supporting independent monitoring, preserving digital evidence, and ensure that counterterrorism frameworks are never misused, including the prohibition of torture. Distinguished colleagues, the rule of law is invisible. It either restrains power, especially in wartime, or it is empty promise. The evidence before us is call to action. By insisting on access, accountability, and prevention, we defend victims, we defend our common commitments, and we defend our credibility of OSCE itself. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker on the list is the Tajik Center for Human Rights.
Уважаемый модератор, дамы и господа, представляю Tajik Center for Human Rights. Меня зовут Абдулваси Шарипов. Я по неволе политический беженец, потому что я сын таджикского политического беженца. Моя семья была вынуждена покинуть родину из-за угрозы пыток, длительного заключения и даже физической расправы.
My family was forced to flee our homeland due to the threat of torture, lengthy imprisonment, and not even physical violence. We escaped from fear from lawlessness and brutality that have become the norm in our country. Today I speak not only on behalf of my own family, but also on behalf of hundreds of Tajik families who have been forced to seek asylum in Europe to escape the repression of Emomali Rahmon's regime. These people are not criminals. They are journalists, human rights defenders, civil society activists, people who simply had the courage to speak the truth. For many years, U.S. State Department, international organizations, including Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, and Amnesty International, have documented the systematic use of torture, arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearance, pressure on the media, and the prohibition of any form of dissent in Tajikistan. Repression in the country is not random, it is systematic. Confessions obtained through torture often serve as the only evidence in court. For my generation, the consequence of this consequences are especially painful. We have had the chance, we have had to change countries, languages, and schools. Our childhood and our confidence in the future was stolen from us. I appeal to OSCE, participating states, and the entire international community help stop torture and lawlessness in Tajikistan, support independent international investigation into all documented cases of violence, demand that the Tajik authorities grant international observers access to prisons and pretrial detention facilities. My uncle, Slidin Sharipov, a man far removed from politics, was sentenced to 12 years because he was a brother of my father, a journalist. Finally, I strongly urge you to support a case against Emomali Rahmon and his inner circle before the International Criminal Court in The Hague for crimes against humanity. Dictators, wherever they are, must never feel immune from justice. The impunity of dictators multiplies the suffering of ordinary people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is the representative of the Turkmen Independent Journalist. You have the floor.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, уважаемый модератор, за последние 3
Dear ladies and gentlemen, for the past 3-5 years, the treatment of Turkmenistan citizens has aggravated. There have been missing people, the members of their families. Despite the bilateral agreements, the Turkey authorities started to prosecute Turkmenistan activists. The number of Turkmenistan citizens involved in criminal proceedings in Turkey has also increased. High officials of police of Turkey played key part in using the foreigners, including the Turkmenistan citizens. For example, in August 2003, Arpenel Deb, the senior officer of Istanbul police, was appointed the head of the Department of Drug and Migrant Smuggling Department. Abusing his power, he used his work car to go to the border control point, having made a conspiracy with his acquaintance on illegal crossing the European border. And then the officers of the heads of the police in Istanbul were not surprised with what happened, given the illegal work and the bribery system that he created while he was at the post of the police senior officer. When another person was appointed in the police of Istanbul. He was part of investigations, saying that that was part of the scheme of illegal migrant smuggling. The proceeding was initiated for the abuse of power against that officer with the indictment, with the charges of bribery, of bringing Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan citizens to the Turkey border, and then those people were given to the services of other countries for the money. That investigation was referred to the Istanbul prosecutor's office, but they also said that that criminal case against this person had to be closed, since there was no evidence, and so the prosecutor's office closed that case, and later on he was renewed in his powers.
Thank you. Thank you for your statement. And I remind colleagues to make sure that you sit behind the correct sign for your organization. The next speaker on the list is the Democratic Choice of Kazakhstan. You have the floor.
Здравствуйте, благодарю за предоставление.
Hello, thank you for the provided opportunity. I'm the coordinator of the headquarters of the opposition movement Democratic Choice of Kazakhstan. I urge OSCE countries to pay attention to Kazakhstan's systemic abuse of counterterrorism, extremism, money laundering and cybercrime laws, firstly as a tool for financial repression within the country and transnationally, and secondly to conceal torture and the extent of human rights violations. These laws do not serve to combat real crimes, but have become a weapon for freezing assets, blocking access to financial services and employment for critics, criminalizing public fundraising for the repressed and the opposition. The culmination of this abuse came in January 2022, when thousands of peaceful protesters were detained and subjected to torture under the guise of fighting terrorism. Many victims of the repressions died. Criminal cases related to these incidents have remained uninvestigated. Those who seek justice in the case of the families of political prisoners are persecuted with torture and transnational financial repression. This is what happened to Mr. Mendy Gaziev, human rights defender, president of the Freedom Kazakhstan Foundation. The Kazakh authority took his brothers hostage. One of them was interrogated to death, another was held in prison for 5 years. At the same time, Kazakhstan sent requests to the US abusing legal assistance and financial cooperation, asking to freeze assets on fabricated charges against Barlik, his family. Other political prisoners convicted on fabricated charges of financing extremism and terrorism are also subjected to torture and ill treatment. Mr. Jalandbayev, Muhammad Karim, Tlujan, Suzdykov are in critical condition. In the case of Mr. Danebayev, actually, the cameras were used as a tool of intimidation to demonstrate human torture. Also, there's a shocking footage of Danebayev's torture. And actually, it appeared during the visit of the European Parliament delegation monitoring the situation in Kazakhstan in August 2022. I call on OSCE participating states to condemn transnational financial repression, the use of torture to combat dissent. We recommend that the OSCE activate the Vienna mechanism and send formal requests to Kazakhstan for clarification on human rights violations in accordance with the Copenhagen document, which requires mandatory written responses within a specified time frame. In case of non-compliance or evasion, this should be recorded as a refusal to cooperate, with subsequent escalation at the national level. Visa restrictions for officials involved.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker on my list is Denmark. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am delivering this statement on behalf of the European Union and the following aligning states: Albania, Andorra, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Norway, Republic of Moldova, and Ukraine. Torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment are abhorrent violations of human rights, human integrity, and human dignity that run counter to international law and the OSCE's concept of comprehensive security. Our OSCE commitments and international obligations are clear. The prohibition of torture is absolute and unconditional. Yet 5 years on from the 2020 Tirana Ministerial Council decision that saw all participating states committing to working further to prevent and eradicate it, the use of torture in the OSCE region persists. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine continues to stand out as the most egregious example in our region of ongoing, widespread and systematic use of torture according to various international mechanisms, including the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, and the OSCE Moscow mechanism. Further, while the EU take note of the release of several political prisoners in Belarus, we remain deeply concerned for the remaining 1,198 political prisoners, often held under life-threatening conditions with credible reports of torture, ill treatment, and inhumane conditions of detention. Likewise, we continue to express concern for the ongoing democratic backsliding in Georgia, which includes excessive use of force by law enforcement officials, and urge the authorities to ensure accountability and to uphold the OSCE commitments. As we approach the European and World Day Against the Death Penalty, observed the 10th of October, we reaffirm the EU's unequivocal opposition to the death penalty in all cases and in all circumstances, as it constitutes a cruel, inhumane and degrading punishment incompatible with the inalienable right to life and human dignity. We call on those states that still carry out death sentences to introduce a moratorium as a first step towards abolition, full abolition. The EU maintains the worldwide abolition on the death penalty at the heart of its priorities and will continue to insist on the upholding of international minimum standards where it is still applied. More than 2/3 of the world's countries have abolished capital punishment in either law or in practice. However, the global trend towards abolition must not be taken for granted. We will not tire of raising awareness to worrying developments regarding the use of this brutal and inhumane punishment, and we are committed to ensuring that the whole OSCE area becomes a death penalty-free zone. This is a shortened version of this statement. The full statement will be uploaded. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement, and thank you for delivering the short version. The next speaker on my list is Human Rights Movement Birduino, Kyrgyzstan. You have the floor.
Dear Chair and dear distinguished delegates, this morning our organization Birduino, Kyrgyzstan from Central Asia, we participated in the side event that was organized by the International Federation for Human Rights regarding the torture used by Russian forces against the Ukrainian prisoners of war, and we strongly believe that this systematic impunity of the Russian authorities will be brought before the independent courts, like including the International Criminal Court. Our organization, Birduino, we are from the Kyrgyz Republic, where the National Center Against Torture was recently abolished, and the authorities launched the initiative to reinstate the death penalty. Birduino and our partners are conducting systemic monitoring of closed institutions and prisons, and we identify nowadays the growing mortality rate among prisoners. Closed institutions in our country have a high mortality rate among prisoners that is confirmed by the reports of the National Prevention Mechanism. Over the course of the last 3 years, about 151 prisoners died there, and the report itself highlights really complicated conditions and poor facilities as factors contributing to mortality level. Here, for the last 3 years, we see that the main risk factors mentioned include challenging conditions of detention and lack of adequate medical care. It's complicated, especially to determine the true causes of death, as the information can be concealed and investigations are obstructed. 19 of the 151 cases who died in prisons committed suicide. The lack of complete and reliable information here, actually, it makes it really difficult to accurately assess the situation and take effective measures to improve conditions of detention. Overall, the high mortality rate in Kyrgyzstan prisons is a serious problem that requires attention of global society and especially OSCE regarding the conditions of detention and transparency in the work of penitentiary system in the Kyrgyz Republic. Here we would like to highlight some points that it's very important to promote the localization of European experience during the global crisis and this localization should be based on the results of Helsinki Plus 50. In this regard, we call on the OSCE members to assist in reforming law enforcement departments to ensure the protection of human rights, the rule of law, security, and sustainable development. Kyrgyzstan should follow the United Nations High Committee's decisions to restore the rights of the human rights defender Azimjan Askarov, who died in prison. We should promote the repeal of the unconstitutional laws, such as the law on extremism. And just finally, we also invite all members to participate in the International Documentary Film Festival on Human Rights that will be in December this year. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your statement. The next speaker on my list is the National Human Rights Center of the Republic of Uzbekistan. You have the floor.
Firuza Shmatova, Ombudsman of Holy Majlis of Uzbekistan. Dear moderator, ladies and gentlemen, recently Uzbekistan has adopted over 30 laws, presidential decrees and orders, as well as other regulatory acts aiming at further improvement of the legal rights and freedoms of convicts. Uzbekistan introduced a national preventive mechanism in Ombudsman Plus format. A public group for torture detection and prevention has been established. It's composed of human rights experts and defenders, healthcare professionals, representatives of international and local NGOs, media, and other civil society institutions. The group's activities are based on a regulation approved by the Parliament. Within the first 3 quarters of 2025, as a part of NPM public groups, under the Ombudsman were involved in 728 monitoring visits to penal institutions. During monitoring visits, detention and labor conditions, medical care, inmates' treatment are examined. Interviews with prisoners are also an integral part of such visits. As an outcome, monitoring visits within these 9 months, the Ombudsman submitted 28 remedy actions notices to the respective government entities, along with 6 analytical briefs to the Parliament. Remarkably, based on these notices, 23 officials were issued with reprimands, 7 officials were brought to administrative liability, and 5 officials were dismissed. Following monitoring visits to pretrial detention facilities on the recommendation of the Ombudsman, operations of 3 of such facilities in the Tashkent province were suspended, and 6 similar facilities in other provinces were completely renovated. It can be considered as an indication of the efficiency of human rights-centered reforms and impactfulness of the civil society in Uzbekistan. On July 2025, based on the recommendation of the Ombudsman and public groups, the first dedicated women care department was formed under the Hospital for Convicts to ensure prompt disease identification and treatment. Together, we have assisted 68 convicts in replacing the inserted portion of their sentence with a more lenient one or in parole release, and as an early incentive, existing disciplinary measures were cancelled for 11 prisoners. Moreover, assistance was rendered to convicts' family members in obtaining financial support from local authorities. We extend our gratitude to OSCE resident coordinator in Uzbekistan for fruitful cooperation and ongoing support of the Ombudsman's office and civil society. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is Jangirik Initiative Group. You have the floor.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые участники конференции. Сегодня в Узбекистане верховенство.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today in Uzbekistan, the rule of law is the most important direction of the state politics. During the last year, wide-scale reform has been implemented. In 2022, the law in which the prevailing role of a human being was stressed. The interference in the activity of courts was forbidden. In the judiciary, the principle of openness is being stressed, transparency as well. Second, the reform in the sphere of human rights is being implemented. The new national strategy of 2021 defined the priority directions of activity to protect human rights. Thanks to this document, the degrading treatment was banned in criminal proceedings, limited and was the ban to apply tortures was banned. Our country implements its commitments to protect human rights. Civil society institutes are playing a vital role in our country. In Uzbekistan, the work is underway to improve implementation of human rights, support human dignity of people. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker on my list is Cultural and Educational Association of Roma Women of Drozero Khanty, The Hope. You have the floor. If you are here. Does Cultural and Educational Association of Roma Women, are they present? If not, I will have to move to the next speaker. Okay. Then we move to the next speaker, which is the Catalan National Assembly, ANC. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Madam Moderator. My name is Ariadna Heinz, and I speak on behalf of the Catalan National Assembly, a grassroots organization defending the right to self-determination of the Catalan people. In relation with OSCE participating states' mission to eradicate torture and degrading treatment on civil society while respecting human rights in counterterrorism efforts, we wish to raise two urgent concerns regarding Spain. During the 2017 Catalan referendum, Spanish police used disproportionate force by beating, dragging, and firing rubber bullets against peaceful citizens exercising their right to vote. Over 1,000 voters were injured, many of them elders. Yet 1 year after the 2024 amnesty law, 129 out of 133 police officers accused of violence, that is 97%, have already benefited from amnesty, while 46% of pro-independence activists remain criminalized and prosecuted, such as those accused in Operation Judas, who still face trials and unfounded terrorism charges. This unequal application of the law sent a dangerous message. State violence goes unpunished, while civic mobilization for democracy is repressed. It undermines the rule of law and erodes public trust in institutions, democratic institutions, supposedly. On the other hand, Spain has repeatedly weaponized anti-terrorism laws against Catalan activists. Civil society leaders have been accused of terrorism simply for organizing peaceful demonstrations or engaging in digital activism. For example, rapper Pablo Hasél has spent almost 5 years in prison for lyrics and tweets deemed to glorify terrorism and is reportedly denied proper care for his Crohn's disease. Such practices not only stigmatize political dissent, but also trivialize the fight against real terrorism. They violate principles of proportionality, legality, and necessity that must govern counterterrorism measures under international human rights law. For these reasons, the Catalan National Assembly calls on the OSCE authorities to urge Spain to apply amnesty and transitional justice fairly without favoring state agents over peaceful citizens, guarantee independent investigations into police brutality during protests, urge Spain to avoid misusing counterterrorism laws to suppress political dissent or peaceful activism, These measures must ensure that Spain upholds human rights in counterterrorism and ends the persecution of peaceful Catalan activists in pursuit of self-determination. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is Alatra International Public Movement. You have the floor.
Уважаемые представители ОБСЕ.
Dear representatives of the OSCE, my name is Dusan Valecek. I am a citizen of the Czech Republic, a journalist and a volunteer with the international public movement Alatra. Throughout my life, I have served the benefit of my country, as have thousands of other Alatra participants across Europe. We have created social, educational, and humanitarian projects aimed at developing civil society. But in the recent years, everything has changed. We, peaceful citizens of democratic states, have become victims of a coordinated campaign of discreditation. Thanks to our experience in analytics and OSINT research, we have determined that this campaign originates in Russia and is coordinated by structures linked to the Federal Security Service of Russia, FSB, through the so-called anti-cult network. This network operates under the guise of combating sects, but in reality it engages in information and psychological violence and incites social hatred. In a sense, this is a new form of hybrid terrorism, a covert operation against Europe's democratic institutions. The FSB is not destroying Europe with bombs, but with information disseminated through media and social networks. The methods are not new. They are borrowed from Nazi propaganda and KGB psycho operations, mass production of false narrative, emotional manipulation, and the creation of artificial enemies. At the center of this network is RACERS, the Russian Association of Centers for the Study of Religions and Sects, headed by Alexander Dvorkin. RACERS is an organization supported both by the Russian Orthodox Church and the FSB. At the European level, the network is represented through the European Federation of Centers of Research and Information on Sectarianism. Up to 90% of its budget was financed by the French government, and Dworkin served as its vice president for over 10 years. At the lower level, journalists and activists operate, whose publications and narrative are fully synchronized across countries. This indicates centralized management and coordinated action. I call on the OSCE to initiate an international investigation into the activities of the anti-cult network, its links with the FSB, and its interference in the affairs of European countries. I invite you to a side event on October 16 at 4 p.m., where we will discuss how the anti-cult movement threatens human rights and freedoms. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker on my list is Witness Against Torture. You have the floor.
See you again. Assalamu alaikum, hello everyone, and wow, nice to see you again. I'm Mr. Al-Daifi, and I represent Witness Against Torture. I'm a former Guantanamo detainee number 441. I was kidnapped, disappeared, and in the CIA black site, tortured and detained for around 15 years without charge or trial. Today, I speak for those caged, for the victims, for the humanity that lost inside Guantanamo's wall. I also acknowledge migrants sent to Guantanamo Bay in recent months who experienced fear and terror being sent to a place whose name is profoundly associated with torture. In 2 months, Guantanamo will turn 24 years. It is a symbol of torture, injustice, and indefinite detention, a place where hundreds of men and boys were kidnapped, tortured, and disappeared. Guantanamo was not a mistake. It was a system built to test how far government could go when they stripped people of their rights. And it became a blueprint. The methods born there, torture, isolation, dehumanization, have been copied across the world. In the CIA black site, in Israeli prisons, Chinese camps, and new US migrants camps like Alligator Alcatraz, where innocent people are caged in inhuman conditions and forgotten. Guantanamo is no longer one place. It's an idea, weaponized and normalized. The exception has become the norm. Let me bring you the voice of one man still in Guantanamo, Abu Zubaydah, number 10016, a Palestinian from Gaza. He was sold to the CIA in 2002, disappeared for years in black sites around the world. The CIA used him as experiment to design the US torture program, what they called enhanced interrogation technique. They contracted two psychologists to develop this program. He was waterboarded, raped, hung from ceilings, and lost one of his eyes. The US later admitted that he was not a terrorist, and he had no role in 9/11. Yet he remained in prison as forever prisoner, classified as too dangerous to release. The United Nations has found, and I quote, that his detention may be now based solely on the need to conceal what was done to him, not because he is a threat to anyone, end of quote.
Thank you for your statement, sir. You're past 3 minutes, I'm afraid. Thank you for your statement. The next speaker on the list is Institute for Human Rights. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We express our deep concern regarding an alarming use of torture in the Russian Federation. In Yekaterinburg, during mass detention of Azerbaijani nationals, two brothers, Hussein and Ziadin Zafarov, were brutally tortured to death. Their bodies bore signs of severe violence, broken bones, multiple injuries, and mutilation. Despite this, Russian law enforcement cynically claimed that they had died out of heart problems. Across Russia, hundreds of Azerbaijani nationals have been detained, beaten, and humiliated. Among them are members of the Azerbaijani diaspora, including lawyers Mutvaly Sheklinsky and his father Shahin Sheklinsky, who were arrested on politically motivated charges. We are also deeply concerned about the case of Bahrom Khamroyev, a well-known human rights defender of migrants who was sentenced to nearly 14 years in prison and is currently being held under torturous conditions in a penal colony beyond the Arctic Circle. Another deeply troubling step by the Russian authorities has been the decision to revoke the citizenship of Azerbaijani nationals and proceed with their deportation as an act that raises serious concern under international human rights standards. We regret that the Russian Federation has decided to withdraw from the European Convention Against Torture, effectively giving security forces a free hand to use torture with impunity. In this context, it is essential that OSCE strengthen its monitoring of the situation regarding torture and ill treatment in Russia, which are clearly being used as tools to suppress dissent and enforce loyalty to the current government. We also believe that OSCE participating states should strengthen their cooperation with the existing UN Special Procedure mandate, namely the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Russian Federation, Ms. Mariana Katsarova. Her mandate plays a crucial role in documenting and addressing the ongoing human rights violations in Russia, and closer coordination between the OSCE and UN mechanism would help ensure stronger accountability and protection for victims of abuse. Torture is not only used against Azerbaijani citizens, but also against other nationals from Central Asia, Caucasus, and especially Ukraine. Millions of migrants in Russia are among the most vulnerable and unprotectable groups, have become easily targets of torture and intimidation. Such practices are reportedly being used to pressure individuals to military service and participation in the war in Ukraine. These grave violations cannot go unanswered. There must be accountability for those responsible, both the perpetrators and those who enable a system of impunity. We urge participating states to use all available international mechanisms to document, investigate, and publicly condemn acts of torture and coercion, including those linked to the war in Ukraine. I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. And the next speaker on my list is Rights and Freedoms of Turkmenistan Citizens. You have the floor.
Yulia Serebrennik, Rights and Freedom of Turkmenistan citizens. In our country, the rule of law does not exist. The judiciary power is fully subordinated to the executive branch. Justice is a tool of political repression. Judges are appointed and dismissed as a result of personal decision of the ruling Berdimuhamedov family. And torture, arbitrary arrests, forced confessions remain systemic practices. Investigations are never carried out. Perpetrators enjoy total impunity. There is no independent or impartial justice in the country. The law has ceased to be a safeguard. A particularly shocking example is the case of Jamal Bazarova, a single mother who became the victim of horrific violence. During interrogation, two investigators, Musayev and Muradov, raped her in order to force her to sign false statements. The investigation into this crime was completely blocked because the one involved in it was Mr. Ryepov, a cousin of the president, who was covered up by Minister of Internal Affairs, who had married his son to the daughter of the president. Not a single lawyer dared to take up her defense, fearing revenge from the security services. Ms. Bazarova has been deprived of the right to see her underage children. Today, her life is in grave danger. They want to kill her. However, repression is no longer confined within the borders of the country. Turkmen authorities persecute their citizens abroad. In France, Canada, Sweden, in the Netherlands, operate freelance agents of Turkmen intelligence services, Kurbanov, Georgi, Akvel Sapar, Anaev, pretending to be part of the opposition. They're in fact engaged in collecting and transmitting personal data of Turkmen citizens to the regime's security services. The information is then used to locate, detain, and deport individuals back to Turkmenistan, where they face torture, imprisonment, or death. Mr. Meyman Kuliyev was forcibly returned to Turkmenistan and killed in custody shortly thereafter. The informants actually spread false information claiming that he was in Sweden or the United States. Other known victims include Mr. Sahadov, Urusov, Ms. Migdanova, who is currently held in a deportation camp in Turkey and faces the risk of being sent back to Turkmenistan. Lawyers fear defending political prisoners, while families face reprisals. This is not the rule of law. This is the rule of fear.
Your statement, Madam, I'm sorry, but the time is up. Thank you so much for your statement. The next speaker on my list is the Forum of Tajik Freethinkers. You have the floor.
Благодарю, госпожа ведущая. Меня зовут...
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Timur Kuchev. I represent the Forum of Tajik Freethinkers. After crackdown of May 2022, the number of political prisoners in Tajikistan increased several-fold. If we compare to 2015, when about 200 political prisoners were registered by us, but now only in Badakhshan region with the Shiite minority is living is the number of political prisoners only in this region is much more, and due to tortures and denial of medical treatment, several people died. I can list names of these people or provide you with this list later. Today, a journalist Abdusator Permuhamazouda requires immediate medical help. The government denies him this assistance. This assistance should be provided beyond prison in a city clinic because his life is under threat. In his case, the denial of medical assistance equals death for him. The number of people who are subjected to torture from May 2022 increases. Then Tajik authorities blocked Rushan region, and after tortures, 2 young people hanged themselves, not being able to withstand this torture. Today, 400 people were deported from Russia to Rahmon at Rahmon's request. These are Pamirian residents, the ethnic minority, as I mentioned. Putin accepts Rahmon in Kremlin. We demand Tajikistan to implement its commitments as a participant of Roma's Charter and arrest Putin to pass him to Gaga, to The Hague.
I'd just like to remind colleagues and participants that you also may submit your written documents online and they will be made available to all registered participants if you have longer documents. I realise that I cut several of you off, but I need to be sure to have the same rules apply to everybody here. So bear with me on that one. Our next speaker is the Association of Central Asian Migrants. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I represent the Association of Central Asia Migrants. Ladies and gentlemen, in September 2015, exactly 10 years ago, dozens of my colleagues of my party, lawyers, journalists, activists were arrested. Some of them got the life sentences, many of them 10 to 20 years of sentence. Our country disregards the calls upon release of those activists without any punishment. The situation gets worse. We get almost every month we get news about the death of one more activist, political prisoner, and there is this pessimism that there is no possibility or mechanism to influence the people in power and to release innocent people. After the latest release of Russian and Belarusian political prisoners, there is this slight hope that we also can see our political prisoners free, and there might be some opportunities available for Western countries to influence our dictators. Along with that, there are many questions. Why does the free world, specifically the OSCE, the European Union, doesn't having such opportunities, doesn't use them in Central Asia, for example, in Tajikistan? Why is there no sanction against the people of power in Tajikistan, against individual officials? And our political prisoners envy their Belarusian and Russian colleagues, counterparts, so to say. And obviously they ask themselves, they ask many questions that neither me nor my colleagues can answer, especially the question of why is there a different treatment towards the same problem in different parts of our continent from the Western world. When Lukashenko and Putin case was given to the European Court, a few leaders, heads of states supported this. But this year, under the support of several human rights organizations, we have applied to the European Court, but still there is no single country, European country, that would support us. Tajikistan is the only country in the Central Asia that has ratified Rome status, and what's an irony that the person who is subject of the Hague Court is accepted and welcomed in Tajikistan. We call for the countries
for your statement. We have to move on to the next speaker, which is Switzerland. You have the floor.
Thank you. Anna Meissen from the Swiss OSCE Task Force. Mrs. Moderator, the absolute prohibition of torture is enshrined in international law and must be respected in all circumstances, without exception. Despite this clear obligation, 5 years after the adoption of the Tirana ministerial decision, torture remains a reality for many in the OSCE region. Switzerland is deeply alarmed by the findings of the latest Moscow Mechanism report on the treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war and hors de combat soldiers by the Russian Federation. As you all know, the report documents widespread torture and ill treatment, including beatings, electric shocks, sexual violence, mock executions, and denial of medical care. These practices constitute serious violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We are particularly concerned by the report's conclusion that torture constitutes a systematic practice ordered or tolerated by the central authorities of the Russian Federation. Against this backdrop, Switzerland recalls that interrogations must always adhere to the Mendes principles prohibiting any form of coercion, ill treatment, or torture. We also emphasize that detention conditions must comply with the UN standards minimum rules on the treatment of prisoners. Eradication of torture requires action across 3 pillars: prevention, accountability, and reparation. We therefore call on all participating states to ensure independent monitoring of detention facilities, to protect civil society and human rights defenders who document abuses, and to provide justice and reparation to victims. States must fully comply with UNCTAD and ICCPR, ensuring that the prohibition of torture is implemented in law, policy, and practice. Mrs. Moderator, Switzerland reaffirms its long-standing commitment to combating torture. During our chairpersonship in 2026, we will continue to give dedicated attention to this issue within the human dimension. Our efforts will build on Switzerland's international engagement in torture prevention, where my country has consistently positioned itself as a bridge builder and advocate for strong multilateral standards within the UN, the OSCE, and beyond. Switzerland urges all participating states to take their obligations seriously, to use this 5th anniversary of the Tirana decision as an impetus to increase our efforts in preventing torture and ill treatment, to respect international human rights law, and to uphold the dignity of every individual under their jurisdiction. Our common objective is clear: to eradicate torture everywhere and without exception. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. The next speaker is Center for Civil Liberties. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. My name is Alena Maximenko. I represent Ukrainian Nobel Peace Prize organization, human rights organization, Center for Civil Liberties. We have been documenting Russian war crimes since 2014, and after Ukrainian full-scale Russian invasion started, we work together with Ukrainian human rights organization to focus all Russians' crimes during this war. Today, I would like to draw your attention to one of the most systematic violations of international humanitarian law committed by Russian federations, Russian soldiers also in Ukraine. The torture of Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians who are illegally detained in Russia and Ukrainian occupied territory is not an isolated accident. It's a systematic policy tolerated by the top leaders of Russia Federation. Russia consistently violated international humanitarian law. People are tortured, held in terror terrible condition and denied medical care. Our initiative, Tribunal for Putin, has documented more than 1,800 cases of torture, and it's only tip of iceberg, including cases of sexual violence. On June 26, the International Day in support of victims of torture, our initiative submitted a communication to the International Criminal Court regarding the systematic use of torture against civilians in the temporary occupied territory of Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian Coordination's headquarters, of the 5,000 body of soldiers repatriated from Russia, at least 206 died in captivity. And we also know cases of civilians. It's Victoria Roshina, Ukrainian journalist who was killed in Russian captivity. Testimonies of released prisoners show horrific pictures for us. People are systematically beaten, tortured with electric shock, stabbed, subjected to psychological humiliation and sexual abuse. And it's the same situation for civilians and POW. And also the involvement of medical personnel deserves special attention. Instead of providing treatment, they often deny medical assistance. And in some cases, we focused subject those who request this medical aid to electric shock and beating. And this pattern has also been highlighted in the report of the special rapporteur, Mariana Katsarova, which confirms that medical personnel involvement to this torture and ill treatments against Ukrainian POW and civilians. And that is why we are argued to develop and apply a special package of sanctions against Russia Federation in response to the state and systematic practice of torture from 2014 and from 2020.
Thank you so much for your statement. We have to move on to the next speaker on my list, which is Forum der Tadjikischen Demokratischen Freunde, Forum of Tajik Democratic Freethinkers. Pardon my German. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you, Madam Moderator and participants. I'm Salim Sultanzada. I represent the democratic opposition of Tajikistan, those who have been raising the issue of violation of human rights in our country for years. The issue of tortures is systematic. It goes through the whole penitentiary system, through the law enforcement and security authorities and services. Despite the amendments to the law, the impunity and the lack of justice lets the perpetrators to use the tortures as a tool. Let me just show you an example from my personal life. In 2015, I was arrested for the false charges. The court gave me 10 days in custody, and while in custody, I asked for reconsideration of the investigation, and in response, they made me starve, and they didn't give me any food or water. In 2020, the polls showed that the tortures were massively used against peaceful citizens. Those peaceful people were subject to tortures, battery, for forcing the confessions of extremism. Many people still don't know the lives of their family members. Only for the 2025, the members of the murders of different political activists remain uninvestigated. The family members were told that they died of the heart conditions. There are dozens of cases that remain without investigation or justice. We, representatives of the civil society, call for the OSCE to force the Tajikistan power to investigate the cases of tortures and murders of political activists. We call for sanctions against seniors who are involved into the tortures. And we also call for support for the Tajik opposition for going to the European Court against Emomali Rahman for the crime against humanity. We call for you to require the access of international observers to the custody places. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being brief. The next speaker is HGO Abiroy. You have the floor.
Hello. I came from Kazakhstan. The rule of law, justice, and protection of dignity are serious issues in Kazakhstan. Regardless of official statements about reforms, in practice we face systemic human rights violations, tortures, lack of freedom, free judiciary, killings by order. Quite often journalists and civil activists become the victim. The state does not investigate, and sometimes the state itself is the suspect. This is a journalist, Tadikov. On June 18, 2024, in Kiev, he was attacked. According to the Ukrainian investigative officers, it was done by the Kazakhstan security forces officials. Kazakhstan officially promised to investigate, but so many time has passed and nothing has been done. Now, actually, the widow of the journalist tries to investigate, but she's also being intimidated and harassed. She has a YouTube channel where she talks about human rights violations and criticizes the lawlessness of the Kazakhstani government. This case represents that Kazakhstan does not investigate ordered killings. It undermines the trust to the authorities. Please safeguard Natalia Sadikova and her children, because there's a high risk of repeated attack. An international investigation in cooperation with Ukrainian authorities should take place. Also, another case. This is an activist, Mohammed Karim. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison on fabricated charges of extremism. That was a politically motivated sentence. They wanted to intimidate everyone who speaks openly. Now he is serving the sentence. His life and health are at threat. Our appeals to the authorities have been unanswered. I appeal to the OSCE countries to ask to resit his case in an open process. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank you for your statement. The next speaker on my list is Public Union for Gender Equality and Women Initiatives. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nigar Ramazanova, Public Union for Gender Equality and Women Initiatives. Dear participants, torture and inhuman treatment are among the most serious violations of human rights. Human dignity is untouchable, and protecting this principle is a main duty of international law. The UN Convention also confirms that torture can never be justified, not in war, not in emergency situations. Every state must be guaranteed this ban, not only in law, but also in practice. Protection of victims, access to justice, and effective rehabilitation must be improved. Most importantly, impunity should end. The abolition of the death penalty is an important step for protecting human rights. Azerbaijan has also taken this step and abolished the death penalty. This is a sign of respect for human dignity and a commitment to communist values. According to the United Nations, in the last 20 years, the number of countries abolishing the death penalty has grown significantly. In the 1990s, about 40 countries took this step, but today more than 110 countries have abolished it completely. In addition, in some countries, more humanist approaches are used, such as not applying the life sentence to persons over 65 years old. In the fight against terrorism, protecting human rights is especially important. Security measures should not restrict human dignity, but must be balanced with rights and freedom. I believe that protection of human dignity, prevention of torture, and abolishing of the death penalty are interrelated goals. With joint cooperation, we can contribute to build a world free of torture and a more humanist and just future. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is the representative of Azaturt Party. You have the floor.
Здравствуйте.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Behomet Mahumaliyev. I represent the Independent Atatürk Party. Today, I would like to share with you the situation with the political prisoners in Kyrgyzstan. In our country, we have already heard the names of Marat Shalabayev, Duman Melkhobayev, Argen Turnjan, Timur Mandabayev, who are the political prisoners. But I'd like to draw your attention to other political prisoners who has been illegally judged by the regime of Nazarbayev and Tokayev, turning them into terrorists and criminals. Those people got long sentences only for the courage to speak the truth and protect their people. So this is Askar Simbay, Kazbek Udarbergenov, Yerzhan Ishimbayev, Mirgulat Murzataylov, Aydar Sizdikov, human rights defender who defended people subjected to the repressions by the regime, and now he's subject of the extraordinary pressure. His wife is on a maternity leave. They have two small children. The younger one is just a toddler, but now the family doesn't have any support. Askar Simbayev is the person who used to help those who were injured during the January protest, and that's why he was charged with the terrorism and put in custody. Kazbek Yermagenov, another example of impunity. He was sentenced to 17 years without any just court. Famous journalist Yerzhan Sulivayev, who is a famous activist, also persecuted by the regime just for their political and civil positions. And there are dozens of such names. Today, I approach to you, European members, European authorities. How can a murderer who made the order to kill people, the murderer who helps Putin kill Ukrainians, how can be called a Democrat? Tokayev is just another minion of Putin, just like Lukashenko. He praises Putin, he praises Stalin and Soviet Union, the one that arranged the genocide against the Asian people. And today Tokayev is making genocide against his own nation. That's why we call for, we ask OSCE to pay attention to that impunity and to condemn the sentences against all political activists and prisoners. We call for not recognizing the regime of Tokayev and to support the fight of the Kazakh nation for democracy and freedom. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your statement, and thank you for keeping within the 3 minutes limit. The next speaker is the NGO for Equal Rights Educational Center.
Thank you, Gania Abrahamian, for Equal Rights. Today, as we discuss the issues of torture and inhuman treatment, I cannot remain silent about the Armenian captives and other detainees still held in Azerbaijan. I cannot but speak about the unbearable pain of the parents who have seen the videos of their sons captured and tortured, and yet their sons are forcibly disappeared. We can only imagine the horrific torture of hundreds of Armenian captives captured since 2020 Even our worst nightmare cannot grasp their sufferings in Baku, where even the Red Cross is banned from documenting the abuses. Meanwhile, Azerbaijani so-called NGOs, gongos, here are talking about peace. Yes, I'm saying gongos, as everyone in this room understands that no organization can truly be independent under Aliyev's regime. Let me be very clear. For our society, for all Armenians, peace is the greatest desire. For the past 5 years, we have lived every single day with the pain and consequences of war. The Armenian side has done everything possible to advance the peace process, agreeing to preconditions, making unprecedented concessions, all for the sake of peace. Azerbaijani gongos here are expressing gratitude to Trump for supporting peace, yet you are disrespecting Trump yourself when on the very next day after the signing of the peace agreement, Aliyev once again voices threats against Armenia's territorial integrity, spoke again about the so-called Zangezur corridor and so-called Western Azerbaijan. Both are direct threats to Armenia's territorial integrity and expansionist plans. Even more, just yesterday in this very hall, a representative of Azerbaijani state institutions claimed that Mehri, a city in southern Armenia.
Madam, could I kindly ask you to keep to the topic of today's session?
Yeah. Azerbaijani state institution claimed that Mehri, a city in southern Armenia, which has never in any period of our centuries-old history been a disputed territory, she said belongs to Azerbaijan. So while we're discussing the importance of Helsinki Final Act and its principles, we hear open violations of the very act from the same stage. Dear OSCE, this should be unacceptable in this institution. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. The next speaker on the list is Dayanch Civil Movement Platform. You have the floor.
Добрый день, уважаемые
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and participants. My name is Lala Abdurrahmanova. I represent the human rights platform, a civic movement, Dayanch. I would like to talk about what is necessary for human rights and freedom. In Turkmenistan, all this, the laws, rights and liberties of citizens do not exist anymore. It exists only on paper. The family of Burda Muhamedov made the country their own property. The special services serve them only. The critics of the regime are seen as a crime. Alisher Sakhatov, Abdullah Urusov, civic leaders have been abducted in Turkey and have been undercover transported to Turkmenistan. Both countries are members of the Convention Against Torture. However, both countries breach their responsibilities. Families of Sakhat, wife and 4 children, live in fear. This crime has been done when the international community knows about it. Thousands of migrants live in Turkey and other countries without passports and legal status. They cannot work, study, or receive medical help, and they are easy victims of criminals. One of the citizen of Turkmenistan in Turkey was used by recruiters and nearly became a terrorist. This is just one of the examples of thousands. the politics of Turkmenistan makes this its own people without future. We report on tens of similar cases. A family of Simi Muratov, they cannot leave Turkmenistan, although they have legal status in Russia. Lachin cannot leave to see her husband. Sergei cannot see his family in Russia. All these cases show that the International Covenant on Human Rights is being violated in the country. Today, Diana Dadasheva, Zarina Akhtyamova, mothers of little children, are in danger. They work in at risk of abduction and torture. Diana Dadasheva as well.
The 3 minutes are up. Thank you so much for your statement. I encourage everybody to circulate their statements as well. The next speaker is Hoof Global. You have the floor. Perhaps I pronounced it the wrong way, Hoof Global. If they're not here, we'll have to move to the next speaker. Human Rights Defenders.
Professor Dr. Hüseyin Demir, Human Rights Defenders, Berlin. Madam Chair, for nearly a decade, Turkey has stood as a textbook example of how the language of counter-terrorism can be weaponized to dismantle rule of law safeguards and normalize torture. Impunity has become the rule, not the exception. The Turkish Penal Code's Article 314 on membership of an armed terrorist organization is so vaguely drafted that over 2.2 million people have faced investigation since 2016. The CAT report shows that confessions are routinely extracted under duress, detainees are denied legal counsel, and torture, ranging from beatings and sleep deprivation to sexual violence, remains widespread and systematic. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has declared such persecution of alleged Gülen affiliates to amount to crimes against humanity. This repression now extends to children and chronically ill detainees, minors detained under the anti-terror law, Parkinson's patients kept behind bars, and women forced to raise babies in overcrowded cells. Torture and impunity reinforce each other. State officials rarely face investigation. Prosecutors decline to act. Court dismiss evidence as state secrets. Meanwhile, Turkey's anti-terror law remains a legal black hole. It criminalizes mere dissent, labeling criticism or journalist inquiry as terrorist propaganda. Nearly 200,000 terrorism cases are opened each year. Torture, arbitrary detention, and impunity are not isolated excesses. They are structural policies maintained by a judiciary subordinated to executive power. When prosecutors become persecutors and judges act as instruments of the presidency, there can be no justice, only intimidation wrapped in legal form. We therefore call on OSCE participating states to urge Turkey to repeal or amend anti-terror law number 3713 in line with international standards, press for independent impartial investigation of torture and custodial death, demand that Turkey implement European Court of Human Rights and UN rulings, release political prisoners, and restore judicial independence, condition security cooperation on measurable progress in accountability. The absolute prohibition of torture allows no derogation, not even under emergency. Turkey's government signed that principle in 1984, and it is time it began to honor it. Until then, our duty is clear: to keep exposing the violence behind the rhetoric of security, and to remind this assembly that silence is the oxygen of impunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is Central Asian Progress and Integration Forum.
Здравствуйте, уважаемый модератор.
Hello, dear moderator. I asked my colleague from the Integration Forum and Central Asian Progress. She asked me to substitute her. I represent Uzbekistani NGO, and if you permit, I will say a few words, attracting your attention to some things. Yesterday, Leyla Sedbek from Kyrgyzstan stated that in Karakalpakstan human rights are violated, allegedly, and people of Karakalpakstan don't have the right to self-determination, and she talked that Tajimuratov was detained illegally. I, as a representative of Karakalpakstan, I'm a person who was born there, grew up there, and I know the situation quite well. I feel part of the region. I would like to tell you that all those statements by Leyla Sedbek, it's all a lie. It's not true. Those allegations are unfounded. Today, in Karakalpakstan, people live in peace with other ethnic minorities. And there are no restrictions to their rights, neither political, economical, or any other. People live, they are engaged in their everyday activities, children study, people try to develop, and the government of Uzbekistan, the government of Karakalpakstan assist them in living peaceful life. That's why I would like you to know about this. We should not, based on false information, incite hatred within the nation, especially if you reside in a different country. Dear moderator, dear conference participants, I appeal to you, please pay attention to the situation. Karakalpakstan lives in peace, people live in peace, and such statements are inadmissible. Leyla Sedbek herself is being actually is under suspicion of fraud.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, dear colleagues, for 4 decades, combating, eliminating, and preventing torture have been the principal objective of the international community. Subsequently, in December 1984, the UN General Assembly adopted the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. Since then, the international anti-torture framework has come a long way. It should be recalled that in December 2020, the OSCE Ministerial Council adopted Decision 720 on the prevention and eradication of torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Today, the absolute prohibition of torture is the object of legal consensus, recognized as a jus cogens norm. Yet despite these notable advances, the promise of the international prohibition of torture has yet to be fulfilled. Despite the global consensus against torture, we continue to live in a world where those responsible for such acts not only escape punishment, but are in some instances celebrated as heroes within their own communities. Another deeply concerning reality is the growing number of reports of torture and ill treatment of prisoners of war. Such practices represent not only grave violations of human dignity, but also clear breaches of international humanitarian law. Article 17 of the Third Geneva Convention leaves no ambiguity in this regard, explicitly prohibiting the detaining power from subjecting prisoners of war to physical or psychological torture or to any form of coercion aimed at extracting information. These obligations are absolute and admit no exceptions. Regrettably, our region has not been an exception to such practice. It is therefore imperative that all parties strictly adhere to their obligations under the Geneva Conventions and ensure that POWs are treated at all times with humanity, dignity, and respect for the law. Madam Moderator, Armenia strictly adheres to its international obligations in the prevention of torture and ill treatment. Following the ratification of the optional protocol to the UN Convention Against Torture, the human rights defender of the Republic of Armenia was designated as an independent national preventive mechanism. In this capacity, the defender conducts both regular and unannounced visits to all places of deprivation of liberty, holds confidential interviews with detainees, and issues recommendations to improve conditions and prevent ill treatment. Colleagues, to ensure the eradication of torture, the international community, civil society, human rights defenders, and relevant international organizations must remain vigilant and respond decisively to every incident. It is essential that consistent pressure be applied on states responsible for such violations so that perpetrators are held fully accountable and victims.
Thank you, sir. The 3 minutes are unfortunately up. Thank you for your statement. The next speaker on my list is Cage Advocacy. You have the floor.
My name is Enes Mustafa. I'm the representative of Cage International, a UK-based rights group. Over the last 2 decades, British authorities have exploited fears and prejudices, particularly towards Muslim communities, to build an infrastructure of authoritarian laws, also known as counter-terrorism laws. Schedule 7 is one such law, a mass surveillance power that suspends due process and deprives citizens of basic rights at the border. Police can detain you for up to 6 hours without suspicion. You have no right to remain silent, and failure to comply with any aspects of the stop can result in a terrorism conviction. Fahad Ansari, a respected lawyer handling sensitive national security cases, was stopped under this power and had his work phone confiscated. He has launched legal action against the government for this targeted stop, where in court it was implied that it was a direct result of his litigation against the government, specifically representing the Palestinian resistance and political party Hamas for deprescription. In a hearing this week to stop police accessing his device, a judge ruled he would allow the police to present their evidence in total secrecy, unseen by the claimant, a mechanism called closed material procedures, introduced in the context of a so-called war on terror, a violation of rule of law principles. This marks an unprecedented assault on the legal profession under the guise of combating terrorism. On the ground, Palestine Action, the most effective pro-Palestine movement, was proscribed this year under terrorism powers by the British government. This has prompted mass outrage from across the political spectrum. Over 2,000 members of the British public, including 2 directors of our organisation, have willfully defied the law in order to protest the ban, resulting in thousands of arrests under terrorism powers. This simple act of civil disobedience exposed the reality of counter-terrorism powers as tools of repression rather than security. The prescription followed a shift starting last year, whereby British authorities began using terrorism-related powers to arrest and detain Palestine Action activists at the behest of Israeli weapons manufacturer Elbit Systems, which was a primary target of their direct action campaign for its role in arming the genocide in Gaza. One of their high-profile cases, the Filton 24, demonstrates an egregious example of such abuses. They've been held in pre-trial detention for over a year, a suspension of the presumption of innocence. Though they haven't been charged with terrorism, a terrorism connection was added to their case to aggravate any potential sentence. As a result, they have faced harassment and abuse in prison. Their case has prompted the Working Group on Enforced Disappearance and also 3 UN Special Rapporteurs to intervene and say that their detention under terrorism powers possibly amounted to enforced disappearance, that the British government treating direct action like terrorism risks chilling the exercise of freedom of expression and opinion, and that the definition of terrorism in the UK is overbroad and counter-terrorism laws have been used to circumvent procedural safeguards. In conclusion, rather than escalating repression, the British government should urgently move towards abolishing authoritarian terrorism powers, a call echoed by its previous independent reviewer of terror powers itself. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. The next speaker is a representative of the Citizens Labour's Right Protection League. You have the floor.
Спасибо. Мое имя Сахиб Мамадов.
Thank you. I am Mr. Mamadov, an Armenian NGO and Armenian lobbyists continue disseminating information about laws on those charged with military crimes in Azerbaijan. They allegedly violated humanitarian law, and they call them actually instead prisoners of war. But those people whose name I named cannot be called POWs because they arrested during the terrorist operation. None of them are subject to Geneva Conventions. When they were detained, they were not combatants. The trial has been going on for 2 years, except Mr. Vardanyan. All of them are charged with crimes, war crimes against our country, including genocide. There have been no final decisions yet. They haven't been pronounced guilty yet. The trial is continuing. The statements that they have been tortured and ill-treated are not true. I repeatedly visited the pre-trial detention where they are being kept. All international principles are being adhered to, and there are regular visits by National Preventive Mechanism. For example, CPT visited Azerbaijan last month and visited the places of detention that they chose. Also, they're not being detained illegally. The UN Working Group on Human Rights actually rejected the complaint of the Armenian side on ungrounded detention of Mr. Vardanyan because his detention was sanctioned by the State Security Agency. In April and May, actually during the session of the committee, there were many comments on tortures in case of POWs. And they stated that Armenian state has not been able to investigate. The UN committee is concerned with the violations of IHL committed by Armenian military forces in relation to Azerbaijani POWs and civilians.
Thank you for your statement. We have to move on to the next speaker, which is the Armenian National Committee of America, Western Region. You have the floor.
Honorable Moderator, distinguished delegates, my name is Garen Jimbashin and I speak on behalf of the Armenian National Committee of America. Today, as we discuss the prevention of torture and the protection of human rights, I have the humble privilege to put to rest all the nefarious and outright false statements made by my colleague. Following the 2023 genocidal ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, the historic homeland of indigenous Armenians, reports of multiple international organizations, journalists, and legal monitors have documented ongoing abuses by Azerbaijani authorities against Armenian captives. These include torture, coerced confessions, and degrading treatment often broadcast for public consumption. One particular horrifying example involved the mutilation of Gayane Apgaryan, a female Armenian soldier whose body was desecrated, her fingers severed, her limbs cut, and stones placed in her eye sockets, and much more. As if that is not enough, Azerbaijani soldiers filmed and disseminated that footage across social media. This was not an isolated atrocity, but part of a broader pattern of impunity, a campaign of dehumanization meant to terrorize, humiliate, and erase. These acts do not occur in a legal vacuum. They occur in deliberate violations of the Geneva Conventions, the Convention Against Torture, and Azerbaijan's own commitment as an OSCE participating state. Yet violations such as these are repeatedly justified under the pretext of anti-terror operations. Azerbaijan has become the first country to convict a captured combatant for illegal border crossing and labeled it as terrorism. The rule of law cannot coexist with selective justice. It cannot thrive where accountability is absent. If impunity is allowed to prevail, the consequences extend beyond Armenia and Azerbaijan. It undermines the credibility of every institution represented in this room. The prevention of torture is not a matter of political alignment. It is a matter of principle. The protection of human rights in times of conflict is not an obstacle to peace. It is the foundation of it. And yet, Azerbaijan, a signatory of both the Helsinki Final Act and the Geneva Conventions, continues to act in open and brazen defiance of both by holding civilian hostages, tortured detainees, and criminalizing ethnic identity. It has not only broken international law, it has betrayed the very framework of collective security that this organization was built to uphold. But this is only the first stage of failure. The credibility of the OSCE itself is at stake when such violations go unanswered, when this body finds its voice to reprimand others for far lesser offenses, yet remains hesitant in the face of mass displacement, arbitrary detention, and documented acts of torture. It risks not only becoming complicit through silence, but setting a dangerous precedent that emboldens similar practices by Russia, practices that the OSCE has firmly condemned today.
I thank you, sir, for your statement. The 3 minutes are up. The next speaker is Zapadno-Kazakhstanski Regionalny Общественный Fund. Apologies for the pronunciation. If you are here, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, participants, participating countries of DEAR and OSCE, I represent the WHDC Fund in Kazakhstan. It's a great honor for me to speak at this conference and to share our accomplishments in Kazakhstan. We work with a very sensitive issue, supporting children in rehabilitation, children that have returned from the areas of military war conflict. The name of our initiative combines the name of Tajikistan and the word of children. We work with children who returned. They were little when they returned from those war areas, and now they're teenagers, and it's very important to help them gain their national identity and feel that they are part of the society so that they are able to build their future. Our foundation cooperates with another one, and we make such historic camps in different historical regions and cities of our country. Turkestan is a cultural heart of our country. That's where we have the symbol of tolerance and spirituality. We chose this city because it inspires, unites, and helps children feel they are part of their history, of their culture and traditions. They take part in different workshops there. They take part in different psychological conversations and group work. We see that they gain that interest to get knowledge. To us, identity, national identity, is not just the language or culture, but it's this inner stamina that helps people remain what they are in any conditions. We also recommend that the Kazakhstan government considers our experience when making the programs for repatriant children. We are ready to provide whole support to the organizations that will implement similar initiatives. Our main goal is for the project not only to function, but to survive and to be stable, because this will influence the prevention of radical extremist attitudes. We believe that working with children is what brings us the bright future. And let me end with my gratitude to the OSCE in Kazakhstan for the support in coming here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is Crude Accountability. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Dear colleagues, my name is Kate Waters. I'm the Executive Director of Crude Accountability. This year marks the 5-year anniversary of OSCE Decision 720, which recognized that enforced disappearances constitute torture. We celebrate this decision and urge the OSCE to uphold its provisions in all participating states. Since February 2025, the U.S. Customs and Border Control and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, have forcibly disappeared or placed in incommunicado detention more than 1,000 people. This is occurring in response to President Trump's executive orders to remove migrants from the United States, deporting them to the country from which they departed and sometimes to third countries. Some of these individuals are held incommunicado or disappeared in facilities inside the United States or at black sites, others of them in other countries, and still others are lost in the system. This is a gross violation of their human rights, and it is in violation not only of Decision 720, but also numerous international human rights norms and standards. Research shows that conditions in ICE holding facilities are cruel, inhuman, and degrading. These facilities include Fed 26, an ICE holding center in New York City, where detainees are held in unsanitary and overcrowded conditions for days or longer, exceeding the allowable amount of time to be held in temporary holding cells. They're denied access to confidential communication with legal counsel, medical treatment, access to sanitary conditions, and are often forced to sleep on concrete floors, at times in seated positions, because the cells are so crowded. At Alligator Alcatraz, another ICE holding facility in the swamps of the Florida Everglades, which was temporarily closed but reopened by court decision, hundreds of prisoners have disappeared from ICE's administrative system, effectively denying them due process. Journalists report appalling conditions at Alligator Alcatraz, including the shackling of prisoners, unsanitary conditions, including overflowing sewage systems, and exposure to extreme heat and humidity. These are just two facilities where cruel and inhuman treatment is rampant, but violations are occurring throughout the United States. ICE agents, their faces masked, carrying weapons and wearing body armor, patrol American communities, detaining men, women, and children as they go about their daily lives in places of worship, at school, work, in their homes, and on the street for arrest and deportation. Most of these people have no criminal record. Many of them have lived for decades in the United States. Some of them are actually U.S. citizens, and all of them deserve and are entitled to basic humanity and observation of and respect for their basic human rights. We call on the OSCE and all participating states to uphold the Helsinki Principles and Decision 720 for all participating states, ensuring that torture, inhumane conditions, and enforced disappearances are not tolerated in any member state. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. The next speaker is Kakamurad Khudorov. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, esteemed colleagues. Thank you in advance for your patience. So, I am here to pass free truth opinion about OCCA from occasional Turkmen people. First opinion, they think useless organization. Why? If you go into website Ashgabat branch, you just seen illusion jobs. OCCA during 26 years in Ashgabat doesn't have real achievement. People asking, how many staff, local staff, graduated in university, especially in legal fields? Second opinion, organization created for ex-EU civilians were laundering money. Why they came for this opinion? Because recently happened events in Ashgabat. People doesn't find any expenses about these events in Ashgabat websites and also OCCA websites as well. And also people thinking, official Ashgabat organized this conference to make a legal dictatorship and OCCA supporting them. Third opinion, EU and OCCA thinks about Central Asian people like a second class. Why? Arrest Karamurza, Yashin, Tikhanovsky, and other activists, Russia, Belarusian, had a widely resonance. But bloodshed in Karakalpakstan, enforced disappearance, civil activists, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, deafening silence. Why people came for this opinion? And they also...
Sir, I will ask you to focus on the topic. You can continue, sir. Just stay on the topic. Thank you.
You didn't want to hear my proposals for Turkmen people.
Sir,
I can
just asked
continue.
you to
Let me
stay on the
continue.
topic.
Your
You have 1 minute
Madam
left. Please
Chairperson.
continue. 1 minute left.
Okay. First, it's essential to establish direct and open communication with independent civil society, bypassing bureaucratic barriers. My personal proposals regarding cooperation with OSCE mission was ignored last year. If you are not prepared to consider employment to provide assistance, training legal professionals for the region. Second, a mechanism for urgent response to repression in Central Asia must be created similar for those existing for other regions as well. And third, it's personal request to consider my project.
Sir, I will have to interrupt you up. And so make sure that you sit behind the right signs, as I indicated earlier in this session. I will now continue and go on to the next speaker, which is the Center for the Analysis of Democratic Processes. You have the floor. The Center for Analysis of Democratic Processes, are you here? Move on to the next speaker, with its Tajik Youth for the Revival of Tajikistan. You have the floor. Anyone from Tajik Youth for the Revival of Tajikistan? Continue to the Public Foundation of Arrukhak. The next is Union of Informed Citizens.
Thank you. Rosanna Avagimian, Armenia. Madam Moderator, distinguished delegates, I rise to address a crisis that challenges the very foundation of the OSCE Human Dimension commitments, the systematic practice of torture, ill treatment, extrajudicial killings, and mutilation committed against the ethnic Armenians. The prohibition of this act is absolute and non-derogable, yet it is being treated as a suggestion. We clearly see a pattern of inhumanity. The treatment of Armenian captives, both soldiers and civilians, is not random abuse. It is a systematic policy of state-sanctioned cruelty. The UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary executions and the Special Rapporteur on torture have raised serious concerns about deliberate extrajudicial killings and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment of persons who are out of combat. Documented, visually verified evidence of war crimes shocked the universal conscience. Soldiers disarmed, wounded, and demonstrably out of combat were summarily executed at close range. These killings include vulnerable elderly civilians and have continued long after the fighting ceased, highlighting a clear intent to target those unable to defend themselves. The barbaric practice of mutilating, carving, and sexually desecrating the bodies of the killed, including service women, is a direct violation of the prohibition against outrages upon personal dignity under Geneva Conventions. The perpetrators themselves filmed, celebrated these acts, using them for propaganda. And here we witness the crisis of impunity for those heinous acts, which is itself an insult to the rule of law. Despite the ECHR applying interim measures regarding the captives, and despite the large amount of video evidence, there have been zero effective independent investigations. Instead, the servicemen implicated in atrocities have been publicly awarded. Moreover, the retention of bodies for months by Azerbaijani authorities only prolonged the emotional suffering of the victims' families, a further act of cruel treatment. The credibility of the OSCE is on trial here. Systematic torture or extrajudicial murder cannot be normalized. I urge this body to insist on a concrete action, support for mechanism utilizing the Mendes principles on effective documentation and investigation, ensuring perpetrators of war crimes are brought to justice. For justice and accountability are the only sustainable foundation for peace with no alternatives. I thank you.
I thank you for your statement. And the next speaker is the Holy See. You have the floor.
Madam Moderator, the inalienable God-given dignity of every human person is inviolable. Consequently, the Holy See has consistently advocated for the unconditional respect for life from conception to natural death. It has also unequivocally condemned whatever violates the integrity of the human person, such as mutilation, torments inflicted on body or mind, attempts to coerce the will itself, as the practice of torture completely contradicts the dignity that is proper to every human being. Institutions entrusted with establishing criminal responsibility should diligently pursue the truth, while ensuring that their proceedings are conducted in full respect for the dignity and rights of the human person. Therefore, in carrying out investigations, laws forbidding the use of torture must be strictly observed. International human rights instruments rightly enshrine the prohibition of torture as a principle that must not be violated under any circumstances. Within this context, my delegation wishes to recall that recourse to the death penalty was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and an acceptable, albeit extreme, means of safeguarding the common good. Today, however, there is an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission of very serious crimes. In addition, a new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. Lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed, which ensure the due protection of citizens, but at the same time do not definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. Bearing this in mind, the Holy See considers the death penalty inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. Therefore, it will continue to press with determination for its abolition worldwide. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. And before we move on to the reserve list, which is also pretty long, I just want to remind people that filming in a plenary hall is prohibited for public distribution. So all participants may film for personal use only if agreed in advance with the person taking the floor. Just underlining that. And then we move on. The next speaker is Karalpak branch of Uzbekistan Children and Families Support Association. You have the floor.
Здравствуйте, я представитель Каралпакского отделения Ассоциации.
Hello, I represent the Karapakstan branch of Uzbekistan Children and Family Support Association. In recent years in Uzbekistan, the wide reforms have been implemented in the country. Protection of human rights is the priority of the state. Concrete measures have been taken to counteract, prevent tortures and protect human rights. Uzbekistan fulfills its international obligations to counteract tortures. The criminal code have been reviewed to conform with the international standards, including the legislation against torture. National preventive mechanisms on tortures have been implemented. In its framework, the regular monitoring in the places of confinement is being implemented. International organizations give positive assessment to activity of Uzbekistan. In Uzbekistan does not apply capital punishment. Instead of the capital punishment, a long-term imprisonment is applied. It is important in the light of respect of human dignity and human life. These reforms have been called sustainable and humane by the European Union. In the sphere of fighting with terrorism, Uzbekistan manages to keep a balance between safety, security, and human rights. The legislation to counteract extremism have been implemented. Uzbekistan reintegrated people excluded from the list of extremists. They received psychological and social assistance. Fight with terrorism complies with the international standards. The transparency of judiciary is provided. There is a full access to the legal assistance. Thank you very much for your attention.
For your statement. The next speaker is Free Dagestan. You have the floor.
Добрый день.
Good morning. I represent the Free Dagestan organization fighting for the independence of Dagestan. I will speak about Dagestan, a region in the North Caucasus, where Russia's colonial policy still remains in 21st century under the cover of the rhetorics of the unity talks. This independence is the result of the historical processes while Dagestan lost its independence. So Dagestan was not voluntarily a part of Russia neither in 19th nor in 20th century. Since 1991, when being part of the Russian Federation, Dagestan's official name is the Republic of Dagestan, but in fact this is just a province without any rights, without the possibility to influence any decisions, and any attempts to speak about the independence are treated as the terrorism. And this is a well built up mechanism of ideological filter sorting out the actions of the officials. The religious people, the activists are subject to arrest or assassination. Any forms of protests or clashes against the country are treated as the treason. Just an example, the permanent counter-terrorist operation that lasted since 2006 to 2016. So this is an example of Russian expansion. In Dagestan, the victims of repression and their families are in the conditions of constant threats, which makes it impossible to apply the court mechanism. And so that's how the law loses its protective function and becomes the tool of the loyalty to the center. As the result of this, Dagestanians who escape those repressions often face those myths that repeat the Russian propaganda. Even now, when Russia is having this horrible war in Ukraine, Dagestanians who escape this mobilization and propaganda, they are subjected to the risk of extradition. Another thing about the capital punishment. In Russia, this moratorium doesn't matter because the life of a human can be taken away without any court. And the murder of Husseinov brothers is one of the examples of that. The service forces of special services of Russia just killed them, and no one was brought to justice. To realize the scale of the repression, you can get to know the report about the repressions in Dagestan. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is from Human Rights Promotion Center Public Union. You have the floor.
Nazrin Aliyeva, founder and deputy chairman of Human Rights Promotion Center in the Republic of Azerbaijan. Mrs. Moderator, dear participants, I believe that interventions by the Armenian NGOs here is a sign of concern that those Armenian detainees exposed during the trial the responsibility of Armenia for many unlawful actions in the territory of Azerbaijan, including the targeting of Azerbaijani civilians. I would like to remind that during nearly 30 years-long aggression against Azerbaijan, Armenia occupied a significant part of the territory of Azerbaijan. During its aggression, it killed tens of thousands of Azerbaijanis and ruined Azerbaijani cities, towns, and villages. All the occupied territories were ethnically cleansed. Also, almost 300,000 Azerbaijanis were brutally expelled from Armenia, where they lived for centuries. Armed forces of Armenia tortured and treated inhumanly Azerbaijani prisoners of war and hostages. About 4,000 Azerbaijanis are still missing persons. Following the end of the conflict in 2020, Azerbaijan repatriated Armenians who were entitled to prisoner of war status and returned bodies of more than 1,700 Armenian servicemen. The Armenian so-called detainees who remain in Azerbaijan are charged with serious offenses that I mentioned. They are the citizens of Armenia, accused of committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. The trial process is transparent. It's open to the public. Allegations by the Armenian entities are groundless. The Armenian NGOs shouldn't intervene into the lawful trial of Armenia's so-called detainees who are accused of serious violations of international humanitarian law. I can note that the freedom from torture is an absolute right in the human rights system. As an important international document, the 1984 Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment or Punishment occupies an important place here. I believe that convention is customary in nature. Azerbaijan has been a party to that convention for a long time, and the crime of torture is reflected in Article 113 of the Criminal Code of Azerbaijan, in the section on crimes against peace and humanity. In order to prevent the case of allegation of torture in detention centers and places of temporary detention, investigate cases of human rights violations and respond quickly to complaints, a quick investigation group consisting of employees of Ombudsman Office has been established in Azerbaijan, and its members regularly visit penal institutions. The chairman of the organization, as a member of the council, can visit penal institutions at any time, and the relevant information about this is constantly...
Thank you, Madam. I'm afraid 3 minutes are up. Thank you for your statement. Now turn to the next speaker, which is Set My People Free. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you to everyone and colleagues. I'd just like to summarize the statement here, regarding torture, we want to raise, my name is Holda Fahmy with Set My People Free, working to advocate for the repeal of anti-apostasy and anti-blasphemy laws. One of the issues that we want to raise is forced marriage, where women and girls are taken abroad and forcibly married, some to child marriage, and some are also forced into re-education camps because the parents disagree with their beliefs, or because they've changed belief, or because they want to practice their belief in a different way than what the family or society thinks from the country that they fled from. There was a report recently from the Swedish Public Service about children who are missing from schools, and Sweden has made a law that they can confiscate passports at the airport if they fear that someone's going to be forcibly married. But I would just want to urge OSCE states to take this very seriously and to work proactively to stop women from being and girls from being forcibly married or sent to re-education camps abroad. And then the second aspect on torture is also refoulement. And just last year, in addition to what we've heard about Russia's violations on the absolute prohibition on torture, they've also refouled and fallen to pressure by the Egyptian government and refouled Christian convert Saeed Abdelrazak in last year, in 2024, to Egypt, where he was we know that he was beaten by authorities and currently is arbitrarily detained. And then another country, very separate, Vietnam, has also used terrorism charges to against individuals for just exercising their freedom of religion and belief, like a young activist called Nguyen Bidap, and he's a co-founder of the Montagnard Stand for Justice. And he was registered under the UNHCR, but is actually currently detained in Thailand and has been seeking asylum in OSCE countries. And so it's very important that OSCE countries do not listen to statements by the country that they fled from, but to actually look into their case and see that they have been advocating for nonviolence and are not a terrorist in the sense that we understand, that is the definition that OSCE stands by. They haven't advocated for violence and have been actually exercising their fundamental human rights, freedom of religion and belief. And then finally, we would like to make an appeal for Yaroslav Mizyak. He's a Ukrainian pastor, and he was sentenced to death earlier in the 90s, but his case has been reported both by Amnesty in 1999 that during the case he was tortured. And so just since the legal process is so long, we urge that Ukraine, that the president pardon him and look into men.
I encourage everybody to circulate their statements as well. Thank you so much. The next speaker is Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. You have the floor. Are you here? Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group? If not, we will go on. The next on my list is Azerbaijan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would consider option to distribute the full statement, and I will try not to cover all subtopics. In Azerbaijan, the fight against torture and ill treatment is carried out within the framework of national legislation and international conventions to which my country is a party. According to the constitutional law on the Commissioner for Human Rights, the Ombudsman implements the functions of the national preventive mechanism as provided in the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, conducting regular and ad hoc visits to detention places. Systematic measures strengthen the rule of law in prisons. Temporary detention facilities are equipped with video surveillance, and the law on ensuring rights of persons in detention facilities require medical examination within 24 hours of admission, with any evidence of torture or ill treatment reported immediately to the prosecutor and made available to the detainee's lawyer. Detainees have regular access to relatives, lawyers, and uncensored correspondence, important safeguards against torture. Azerbaijan also signed Protocol number 13 to the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms concerning the abolition of the death penalty in all circumstances. Turning to the issue of terrorism, we underline that it remains an enduring threat to long-term peace and security, as well as to the political independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity of all states. Terrorism also undermines states' rights and efforts to safeguard the rule of law, protection of human rights, and socio-economic development. Respect for the rule of law is an essential tool in countering terrorism and should be a central element both in the context of protection and response measures. Areas of armed conflict, particularly territories under foreign military occupation, often create conducive contexts for terrorists, separatists, and other non-state actors. I heard, Madam Moderator, unfounded allegation against Azerbaijan with regard to Armenian detainees. Perhaps the first step toward credibility of those statements would be to acknowledge the crimes committed under their own flag before lecturing others. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. The next speaker is from Digital Generation Uzbekistan. You have the floor. There's no one here from Digital Generation Uzbekistan? Then I move on to Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Sorry, are you from the Uzbekistan NGO?
23 октября
On October 23 in Turkey, in Ankara, there will be a constitutional court trial about 2 Turkmeni bloggers. Unfortunately, they disappeared after they left the deportation center. We had many requests on behalf of NGOs, lawyers, the wife of Mr. Sahatov, but Turkish authorities have not responded. They turned to the prosecutor's office, to the police, to the migration service, but still they were not taken into account. Turkish law enforcement bodies refuse to consider those cases properly. Well, people are missing. They disappeared from the Turkish territory. Such disappearance became a practice.
Digital Generation Uzbekistan.
No, from Helsinki.
Okay, sorry.
No, I am from Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. I'm very sorry.
Закон Турции об
Turkish law on foreigners and international protection states.
The floor was given to the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. Apologies. You have the floor, Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights.
It's the Polish Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights. Maybe we have a... Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Madam Moderator, can I be given
yes,
the
you're
full
given
time?
the floor.
Thank
Apologies.
You. Thank you. My name is Elena Vasilev from Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights in Poland. And as a Polish human rights NGO, we would like to focus on Poland's particular role in ensuring that perpetrators of torture are punished and the victims and survivors receive justice. Because of its proximity to Ukraine, Poland has received millions of displaced people from Ukraine following the ongoing military invasion of the Russian Federation. Many are survivors of torture and other grave violations of international law. They face physical injuries and psychological trauma. In neighboring Belarus, torture and repression also continue under the current regime, which supports Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. Many survivors from Belarus have fled to Poland in search of safety. Since 2022, the Polish prosecutors have been investigating international crimes linked to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Nearly 3,000 witnesses, many of them refugees and survivors of torture, have already been interviewed. Unfortunately, to date, the investigation has been complementary in nature. It means that it's limited to supporting the proceedings before Ukrainian courts and the ICC, the International Criminal Court. But we believe Poland can do better. Under the principle of universal jurisdiction, Poland can investigate and prosecute international crimes committed in Ukraine, Belarus, and elsewhere. Under this principle, states may and indeed should initiate criminal proceedings against perpetrators of the most serious international crimes, regardless of where they were committed. This includes acts of torture. Applying this principle effectively would allow Poland to meet its OSCE commitments. It would also reflect the values that Poland has repeatedly affirmed within the international community, including in this venue. And it would bring justice and hope to the survivors. To make these obligations real, we call for concrete steps. First, establish and properly resource a dedicated unit within the National Prosecutor's Office to investigate crimes under international law, including acts of torture. Second, ensure the effective use of universal jurisdiction. The provisions of the Polish Criminal Code permit it, but they have not yet been applied despite many expert discussions and legal opinions. And third, but not least, guarantee the rights of victims and survivors, ensure they have access to medical and psychological rehabilitation. For more detailed recommendation, we refer you to our written submission. Thank you.
I thank you for your statement. The next speaker on my list is Protection of Rights Without Borders.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Asmi Karutinyan, and I represent the NGO Protection of Rights Without Borders from Armenia. The national legislation in Armenia prohibits torture and inhuman degrading treatment. However, the practice in this regard remains concerning. There is evidence indicating trend of ill treatment by police, both in police departments and vehicles, during mass protests and during apprehension. A key issue is the lack of accountability at multiple levels. Despite the initiation of several criminal cases, investigation into such cases remains insufficient. Concerns about the protection of individuals from torture and ill treatment extend beyond Armenia's domestic context and have also been raised in relation to Armenian prisoners of war held by Azerbaijan in connection with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Having already suppressed their own independent human rights lawyers, Azerbaijan now seeks to explore their repression by deploying Gongos to interfere with our activities in highly respected fora, a stark reminder that authoritarianism left unchecked only deepens and corrodes beyond repair. Following the war unleashed by Azerbaijan against Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, numerous prisoners of war, both citizens of the Republic of Armenia and ethnic Armenians, are being held in prisons in Baku, being subjected to torture and inhuman degrading treatment. Despite progress in the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the issue of prisoners of war remains unresolved. There is currently no independent monitoring mechanism in place in Baku to oversee the treatment of detainees. Furthermore, Armenia has come under pressure and without any consultation with human rights community and victims, the government agreed to withdraw the interstate cases before ECHR and UNICG against Azerbaijan as condition of peace process, which risks to leave the victims of torture without justice and foster the climate of impunity for torture and other grave violations. Azerbaijan has not taken any action to acknowledge the fact of gross human rights violations, including torture and ill treatment of Armenian soldiers and prisoners of war, as well as the ill treatment of female soldiers tortured, mutilated, and killed in Jarmuk in 2022. Azerbaijan has not taken any action to investigate them and hold the perpetrators accountable. Withdrawing interstate complaints will result in absolute impunity for such violations and crimes committed by Azerbaijan and lead to the commission of new violations. Armenia is committed to peace. However, without justice, there can be no sustainable peace between the two countries. Taking into consideration the presented concerns, we urge the human rights organizations and delegations present here to take immediate action and call Azerbaijan authorities to immediately release.
I thank you for your statement, Madam. And we move on to the next on the list, which is Political Movement Group 24. You have the floor.
Здравствуйте.
Good afternoon. I represent the political movement group 24. On behalf of our group, let me just draw your attention to the situation in Tajikistan, where we have the systematic violation of human rights, referring to three key elements of today's agenda: torture, death penalty, and terrorism, fighting terrorism. Torture remains the main tool of fighting activists. Only this year, over 10 persons died in custody, and none of those cases was properly investigated. The people in custody who are also have some illnesses, they are deprived of medical care in disregard of international norms. Formally, we have the moratorium for death penalty, but the authorities implement that kind of penalty through forcing people in custody to kill themselves. And in 2015, our leader, Marlik Kuvatov, along with other opponents, were subject to assassinations, and this shows that such events have become the part of the strategy of our government. Thousands of our nationals are subject to persecution only because they do not agree with the regime. And this fighting with the extremism is used for suppressing those who think differently. Our movement believes it's important to state that the international community should fight for independent investigation of the deaths and impose sanctions against those accountable for those repressions. Those people should have restricted access to their finances, to their grants. They should be banned from entering US or Europe. Group 24 confirms its readiness to cooperate with international organizations on protection of human rights, on bringing those guilty to accountability. Thank you for your attention.
I thank you for your statement. The next speaker and the last on this list, most probably because we need some time to get back to our panelists, is the representative of Barkador Hayat. You have the floor. If there's no one from there, then the next is Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We are deeply alarmed by widespread use of torture and ill-treatment against journalists, activists, and human rights defenders in Azerbaijan. These acts are not isolated incidents, but part of the broader pattern of repressions against independent voices in my country. Those detained for their journalistic work or human rights activities are being held in life treatment conditions. They are facing both physical torture and psychological abuse, including threats of violence against their family. One of the most horrifying examples is the case of Bakhtiar Hajiev, human rights defender who was abducted, brutally beaten, and humiliated. Imagine, law enforcement officers urinated on him as an act of deterioration and revenge for his activism and recorded everything on video camera. The authorities have also arrested Fikret Jafarli recently, the head of the Center for Investigation of Torture, just before visit of the European Committee Against Torture to Azerbaijan, and another Rufat Safarov, prominent human rights defenders who was arrested in December 2024 for exposing serious torture cases. Their detentions represent an attempt to silence those who monitor and report on state abuse. We are equally concerned by the public torture and humiliation of 8 Russian nationals in Azerbaijan who were arrested on fabricated charges and whose abuse was broadcast on the state televisions. The victims, mostly Russian IT specialists and migrants, including Anton Drachov, Sergei Safronov, and 6 others, beaten, tortured, and paraded before cameras in violations of every standard of human dignity and due process. We urge Azerbaijani authorities to immediately cease this use of torture and ill-treatment, release all those detained for exercising their fundamental rights, and ensure accountability for perpetrators. We call on the OSCE and participating states to strengthen, monitor, and press for independent investigation. I would like to also add another important cases of our colleagues who was recently arrested in Azerbaijan. It's prominent human rights defender Anar Mamadli and Bashir Suleymanli. Both of them also collected data regarding electoral violations, and they're also collected and distributed monitors and do monitoring related with this case of tortures, which is continued in Azerbaijan systematically. And we would like to highlight, especially we have like dozens of victims, and unfortunately, Office of Ombudsperson never even during their existence accept.
Thank you, sir, for your statement. We're drawing towards a close, and I still want to give the floor back to our distinguished panelists for some reflections on the very rich discussions and interventions and statements that we've had here today. We also have 2 rights of replies after that. So without further ado, I will now go to Gushkin and give you some final remarks.
But we have 5 minutes still to talk. Today is the second day when I'm 56 one. When I was registering the first one, I'm 56 one.
So I don't know about that, but I have to give the floor back to the panelists. My deadline is 1 o'clock. Thank you.
This is a strange thing. I'm a neutral.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, moderator. So today's event and today's forum just highlight us the problematic of the rule of law. What it means that this rule of law is not abstract words, it's not a formality, but the thousands of individual cases of people who are suffering from torture, from disgrace, from inhuman treatment, from sexual and gender-based violence, especially conflict-related, from arbitrary detention, from enforced disappearance, from violations of the right of a fair trial, and last but not least, from a right to be alive. And I'm currently encourage you to go further in ensuring the principle of rule of law in your particular countries, and remind all of us that the rule of law is nothing without accountability. And I kindly remind you that is today and yesterday and today, a person who just got a warrant arrest from the ICC is visiting without any kind of circumstances to a state party of the Rome Statute. Thank you very much, and I give the floor for your moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gushin, for those words. I now pass the floor directly to you, Slavica Dimitrievska.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, it was really a privilege to be today here with you and to listen, to have the opportunity to listen to all your presentations, talking about the prohibition of torture from one side and still the presence of torture on another. Thereby, I would like to call upon the states to abide to the international conventions they have signed and ratified, where the prohibition of torture is absolutely prohibited, and at the same time to simply respect the human rights of all persons. At the same time, I would like to support and urge the civil society organizations and the national human rights institutions to keep up the good work and continue alert the international community about cases of torture and ill treatment. Also, I would like to urge them to reach their peers so that their voice can reach further. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to everybody who has taken the floor. I know that many of you feel you haven't said all. Some of you have not been able to take the floor because we're now very close to 1 o'clock. I do encourage you to upload your statements. They will be read. And I wish you very fruitful conference ahead. We really appreciated this discussion. Thank you. And have a good afternoon.